The night was colder than usual on the Eastern Front. A thin layer of frost coated the grass along the edges of the Soviet airfield, near the Don River. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow across rows of wooden biplanes, lined up like fragile insects. They looked harmless, too harmless to belong to a war that had swallowed millions of lives. But these planes, and the women who flew them, were far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. They were the ghosts of the battlefield, the phantoms of the night sky. One by one, the pilots of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment prepared for another mission. This was an all-female unit, a true anomaly in the male-dominated world of military aviation. Among them was Nadia Petrova, a 21-year-old with sharp, determined eyes and a dark braid tucked neatly beneath her leather flying helmet. She had already flown nearly 80 missions, each one a terrifying dance with death. Yet, she felt the same knot in her stomach every single time she approached her plane. It wasn't a sleek, modern fighter. It was a polycop of Po-2, a slow, outdated wooden biplane, originally designed for crop dusting and pilot training. Its frame was mostly wood and canvas. The Germans had a nickname for it, the sewing machine, because of the soft, rattling buzz its engine made. But at night, when these brave women cut their engines and glided silently over enemy lines, the Germans had another, more fearsome name for them, Nachthexen, the Night Witches. Nadia climbed into the open front seat of her aircraft while her navigator, Irina Volkova, settled in behind her. Irina was 2 years older, calmer, and always carried a small, worn notebook filled with hand-drawn maps and calculations. They had flown together since their very first mission. Their bond was the kind that only the crucible of war could forge, quiet, strong, and unbreakable. They understood each other without words, a silent language spoken in the dark skies over enemy territory. A mechanic rushed forward, his breath fogging in the cold air, and handed Nadia a slip of paper. "Target coordinates," he said, his voice low. "German supply depot. Heavy defenses reported." Nadia just nodded, her face unreadable. Heavy defenses were normal. Everything about their missions was risky. Their planes had no radios to call for help, no armor plating for protection, and no parachutes. A single well-aimed bullet could turn the wooden frame into a blazing inferno. But orders were orders, and duty called. As the clock ticked past midnight, Nadia pushed the throttle forward. The Po-2 rattled and shook as it lumbered down the makeshift runway. The biting cold wind whipped at her exposed cheeks as the small plane lifted into the vast, unforgiving night sky. Below them, the world dissolved into an ocean of darkness, punctuated only by the faint, distant glow of burning towns and the flicker of artillery fire on the horizon. They were alone up here, 2 women in a fragile machine, flying toward the heart of the storm. Irina tapped Nadia's shoulder and pointed ahead. "Wind is rising from the northeast," she shouted over the engine's noise. "We'll need to adjust as we approach the target." Nadia nodded, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. Up here, suspended between the stars and the war-torn earth, she felt a strange and potent mixture of crippling fear and exhilarating power. She was flying headfirst into mortal danger, yes, but she was also proving something, proving it to her country, to the world, and to every man who had ever said that a woman's place was not in a cockpit. As they neared enemy territory, Nadia made the move that earned them their name. She cut the engine. The sudden, deafening silence was haunting. The plane became a ghost, a whisper drifting like a shadow across the sky. Below, German soldiers smoked cigarettes and chattered around dim lanterns, completely unaware of the silent death gliding above them. The sewing machine had become a witch on a broomstick. Irina leaned forward, her eyes scanning the dark landscape, a little more to the left, now steady. The ground drew closer and closer as the plane glided silently downward. Then, Irina's voice, a tense whisper in the quiet cockpit, dropped. Nadia pulled the release lever. 2 bombs tumbled from the undercarriage, slicing through the air like silent daggers. They erupted a moment later in twin explosions that tore the night apart. Flames shot skyward, illuminating the chaos below. German soldiers screamed, scrambling for their rifles and diving for cover. Anti-aircraft guns swiveled wildly toward the sky, and massive searchlights began cutting through the darkness, hunting for their unseen attacker. The calm silence was shattered, replaced by the roar of explosions and the cacophony of war. "Engine!" Irina shouted. Nadia restarted the engine. It coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life with a defiant growl. Instantly, their position was revealed. Tracer rounds like fiery red needles streaked upward, trying to stitch their doom into the night sky. The searchlights crisscrossed frantically, their beams sweeping the darkness. There, A German gunner shouted from below. A brilliant, blinding beam of light locked onto the little Potu, pinning it against the black canvas of the sky. "Hold on," Nadia yelled. She pushed the plane into a sudden gut-wrenching dive. The wind screamed against the wings. Bullets tore through the air all around them. She could hear the sickening rip of rounds grazing the canvas fabric of the plane's wings. Irina gripped the sides of the cockpit, her voice strained. "Too close. They're too close." Nadia banked sharply to the left, a desperate, evasive maneuver. The plane dipped so low that the tops of the trees whipped past them in a blur. A burst of gunfire exploded just off their right wing. Then, a shell burst right behind them, shaking the entire aircraft so violently it felt like it would fall apart. "Nadia, gauges are dropping." Irina cried out. "We've taken damage." Nadia's jaw tightened. All fear evaporated, replaced by an icy razor-sharp focus. "We're not going down tonight," she said, her voice steady and firm. She pulled the plane upward, zigzagging, unpredictably. This was one of the Potu's few advantages. It was so slow that faster German fighters would often overshoot them, unable to match their low speed. But tonight, the ground fire was relentless. They were almost out of range, almost free, when a bright, blinding flash tore through the sky nearby. An anti-aircraft shell had exploded near their left wing. The plane lurched violently sideways. Wooden splinters flew through the cockpit. The Potu groaned like a wounded animal. Irina screamed, we're hit bad." Nadia felt her mind sharpen even further. "Hold on," she commanded, her hands and feet working the damaged controls with instinct born of experience. "I can keep her steady." Smoke trailed from the damaged wing, a dark plume against the moonlit sky, but the plane stayed airborne, barely. It took them 10 agonizingly long minutes to clear enemy territory. Every second was an eternity. The damaged engine sputtering, the controls fighting her every move. Only when the distant, welcoming glow of their own Soviet camp came into view did Nadia finally allow herself to exhale a shaky breath. They landed rough, skidding hard against the snowy ground, but they landed. They were alive. Mechanics and medics rushed toward the crippled aircraft as they came to a stop. Irina climbed out trembling, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she looked back at the plane. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. Nadia stepped out of the cockpit and took a moment to look at the bullet holes riddling the fuselage. The damage was far worse than she'd expected. The wing was shredded, but the plane had survived, and so had they. As she walked toward the command tent to report the successful mission, she overheard a group of male pilots watching her. One of them muttered to his friend, just loud enough for her to hear, "How do these girls keep coming back alive?" Nadia didn't turn. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because she knew the truth. They weren't just pilots. They weren't just soldiers. They were the Night Witch's women who fought in darkness, with a courage that burned brighter than any bomb they dropped. For them, every single night could have been their last. But every night, they flew anyway. And for that, history will never forget them. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible tales from history.